Welcome to Grace Church, a fellowship that's been serving the South Coast for over 23 years. Grace Church is more than a congregation. They're a family of believers who are ready to welcome you to a place where you can feel the tangible grace of God. Join Grace Church every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for a time of contemporary worship and a relevant message from the Word of God. For more information, please visit gchurch.us. And now here's Pastor Ron Moore with this week's timely message.
We've been talking about core values in the church, and actually the 6 points, we're on point 2 here, but that's our core values. And the core value is a deeply ingrained principle that guides all of Grace Church's actions and how we make decisions in our church. At least it should. And I can tell you that over the last few years, maybe it hasn't. A lot of things have interfered in the core values of this church. And I didn't recognize it because as time passed, we just kind of let things, we just kind of start coasting for a while. And I felt like about a year ago that God was telling us that we are done coasting, and I didn't know what to do about that, honestly. And I believe that God is talking to us about it. So last week we talked about the first item, commitment to excellence. And commitment to excellence, I like this part here where it says this. I think this might be or may not be a slide, I don't know. Dreaming more than others think is possible, risking more than others think is safe. Expecting more than other things is, or practical in this one, is expecting more than others think is possible. And if you really look at those first three, that's faith, hope, and love. That's really what that is. And then the last one is caring more than others think is wise. And I find that sometimes people think that we care more, that if we're not careful, we'll care too much. And especially in this day and age where there seems to be a lot of dissension amongst the citizens, whether they're liberal or conservative, or whether they're homeowners or homeless, or whether they're natives or they're aliens. Do you understand what I'm saying in all of that? I'm working on a sermon right now about anger, and I'm waiting until just before our elections to give that sermon. I found that at least since January, 1st of January, first sermon that we started actually with our mission, I found that all my sermons right now are very challenging to the congregation. And when I'm speaking to you, a lot of times I see you, processing maybe. Maybe you're thinking, that guy's crazy, I'm not going to do that, or whatever. But I think that there's a challenge that's coming across. And somebody asked me the other day, how was the last week's sermon received? And I said, I think everybody was challenged. I know I've been challenged. And the better thing is I've been challenged now for a while thinking about all this. And so it's kind of like I've repented a lot, and I'm trying to do better in all the things that you do when you're challenged. But I want you to be challenged today, and especially today. We said last week, why shouldn't Grace Church be the most excellent organization in the city? That's true. Why shouldn't it be? Why shouldn't if God gives us a spirit of excellence, then why shouldn't it be the most well-organized thing in town? And by the way, we're not trying to be in competition with any other church. I've told people all along, there's better church. There may be better churches in this town than here. I don't know. I don't think so. That's why I'm still here. But there may be. But we're not trying to be better, by the way, so that we can outdo another church. We're not in competition to any churches. And we're not even trying to be more excellent than any other church. We're just trying to be the very best we can with what we got and what God has given and gifted us with. And I can just tell you that I've pastored a long time, almost 50 years now. And I've seen my churches grow, and I've seen them get smaller, and I've seen lots of things happening, different kinds of situations inside the church. But I've never been as excited about a church as I am about this church right now. And mostly it's because of this. It's because 2 years ago God gave me a word, and for 2 years I didn't see it coming to pass. And every time my hope would fail a little bit, God would give me another word to kind of pick me back up again, to hold me until we got to this place. And now we're beginning to see some of the prophetic words that we received begin to come to pass. It's just starting up, and it's kind of exciting. Feels like it did in the year 2000 when we started this church. There was this excitement about what God was doing. Now, we do excellence, by the way, for one reason only, and that's for the second part of our core value, and that's a heart for evangelism. Everything that we do for excellence, we do for the second part, which would seem like maybe it's secondary, but it's not. In fact, I've got an asterisk by this, the heart for evangelism, because it is actually the most important of the core values. But the most important of the core values needs to come in second, because first of all, we need to have a commitment to excellence before we can actually get a real heart for evangelism. Because as long as we're thinking mediocre, as long as we're thinking this is good enough, as long as we're thinking salvation is just hell insurance or heaven insurance, and I'm just trying to get there, well, to heaven, and trying not to get to hell. You know, if that's all it is, then we won't really, unless we understand that there's a more excellent way than that, we're not going to get into today's sermon, the heart of evangelism, the most important of our values. And so why haven't we emphasized the value evangelism more is what I begin to think about myself. And I thought about this. How many have ever been on an airplane? How many have been on an airplane more than 5 times? Raise your hands. How many have been on an airplane maybe 50 times? Raise your hands. That's when it really gets bad. I've flown a lot. And especially when we were going to New Zealand and back. And there was something that these flight attendants would always say, wouldn't they? They would say, if you're seated in an exit row over the wings, then I need to talk to you. They would say things like this: there are 6 exits on this airplane, except the ones that go overseas, there's like 10 of them. And they would point those out to you. And then they would say this. They would say, if there's a loss of pressure in the cabin, a mask will fall down. And they would show you this, and they put it on. And then they would tell you that you're to put on your seatbelt, and then they show you how to put a seatbelt together. We've been wearing seatbelts since 1946, but they still want you to put a seatbelt on, see? And I found myself looking around and seeing that absolutely no one's paying any attention. Not because it's not important, because how many know that could be really important information if you needed it? But nobody's paying attention because they've heard it so often that it's just, it is this. If you're seated in the exit row, blah, 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 and we just kind of forget about it. Well, when I talk about the Great Commission, sometimes I feel like when we talk about going to all the world and preach the gospel, everybody just kind of goes on auto mode, and it just is the same thing. It's just like blah, 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 blah. Yes, we've heard this before. In fact, I think the most destructive phrase in a Christian's mouth is, I have heard this before. There's something that I do, and I've got 2 plaques. I got one in front of me as I'm studying, one behind me as I leave the room. These 2 plaques say, today is a good day to learn something new. And I try to make that one of my really core values of my life is I never leave my office until I have learned something new about God. And I remember one time after I just was a new young pastor, and I'd preached about, 50 times. And I looked at my Bible and I thought, I have preached everything in the Bible and there's nothing left in this Bible to preach. Until I really began to study the Word and find out now that after 50 years and thousands of sermons that I haven't even scratched the surface. And I can tell you that in evangelism, you may think you know all that you need to know or all that you want to know about evangelism, but I'm here to tell you that the word evangelism only means one thing, and that's good news. And what the world needs today is good news, and it doesn't need any more bad news. The Bible didn't tell us to go into all the world and say what you just saw on CNN. However, that seems to be what's going on. So the Great Commission. Let's start in Matthew chapter 4. Jesus is calling his disciples. He's got 4 of them. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He's going to call. And he gets them, and he says to them, be real careful on these slides, Ryan, because they're just one after the other. I don't want you to get too far ahead of me. But he says unto them, follow me. We all can figure that one out. Follow me. And then he says, I'm going to make you. Now he says something about that. He said, I'm going to make you, as if they aren't already that. Like, I'm going to take you and make you into something. First day. This is day 1. He came to me and said, follow me, and I'm going to make you. And then he says something that it had to confuse them. It confuses me. He says this, I'm going to make you fishers of men, or fishers of people. NASB says fishers of people. I'm going to make you fishers of people. So Jesus comes to him, and he says, on the first day he meets him, he sits down with him and says, I want you to follow me, and I'm going to make you. Now, if Jesus was coming here today, and he was standing with me, and he would say, follow me, and I will make you, I would think maybe he could make me a good preacher. Maybe he could make me healthy, or wealthy, or wise. See? Maybe there are some things in my life that he could make me hopeful, or he could make me happy. I mean, we would have a whole list of things, and by the way, he will do every one of those things for us. But he comes to a place where we say, what is the number one thing he wanted to tell these guys? On day 1, just called them. They're brand new. He says, this is what I'm going to make you. I'm going to make you fishers of men. I want you to quit fishing for you. A lot of people, there's 2 reasons people fish in the world that we live in today. Fishermen, most fishermen. I can tell you right now, I sold my boat. I haven't been fishing a lot in the last few years. And I can't tell you how much money I've saved. We haven't quit eating fish. We go to Costco, we buy our fish now. Debbie will say, look at the price of salmon at Costco. I said, do you know what the price of salmon costs if you go out and fish for salmon? People say, well, it's fish, it's free, it's just free for the taking. As they sit in their $14,000 boat with a $300 reel, it goes on. He says, I want you to quit thinking about making money, but thinking about yourself. But I want you to go out and begin to think about other people and to bring them the good news of Jesus Christ. I think they could have said, no, fix me first. Because when I talk about evangelism, people say, well, I'm not ready for that. Well, these guys were ready for nothing except fishing. They were good for nothing except fishing. In fact, fishing was the only thing they knew how to do. Peter, when he gets upset at the end, when Christ has been crucified and he thinks it's all over, he says, well, I'm going back to fishing, because fishing is what I know what to do. And some of us, when we come to the end of our rope, we think, well, I'll go back and do the things I know how to do. Well, Jesus said the very first thing, he said, what I need you to do is I need you to follow me and let me make you fishers of men. Let's look at Luke chapter 9. This is a message because its flow is easy. It's a story I want to read to you. Jesus said to another, follow me. And he said, certainly, but first excuse me for a couple of days. I have arrangements to make for my father's funeral. By the way, his father probably wasn't dead yet. That might have worried father a little bit. And Jesus refused. He said, first things first, your business is life, not death. And life is urgent. Announce God's kingdom. And another said, I'm ready to follow you, Master, but first excuse me while I get things straightened out at home. And he says, no procrastination, no backward looks. You can't put God's kingdom off until tomorrow. Seize the day. Do you want the best day to become a fisher person of men is today? I like this saying. I don't know who said it, but I've heard it lots and lots of times. You know what I'd do if I wasn't saved? I'd get saved. That's what I'd do. It's easy. If I wasn't saved, I mean, people say, well, I don't exactly know why. Well, we know why. And so if I wasn't saved, I would tell you what, I'd just get saved. That's because I'd seize the day. Because every day that you don't live for Christ is a day you didn't get to live for Christ. On the same set, every day we don't spread the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is a day lost. We got to seize that day. So the number one priority is for Jesus. Number one priority is for him to make you a fisher of men. I'm thinking a lot about fishing. When you go fishing, you don't just walk down the road and all of a sudden there you are and you're fishing. Like my wife said, yeah, that happened. Where have you been? Well, I've been fishing. Well, you were supposed to go to the store. I know on the way to the store, I don't know what happened. I just ended up at the lake. I don't know how that happened. See, because when you go fishing, you're prepared to go fishing. Now, there's a time to go fishing. In fact, there are better times than not to go fishing. There are tides and there are seasons and all sorts of things. And fishing, by the way, can be very inconvenient. I hear people, they'll say this in just a few months, in January and February, we're out steelhead fishing. And that's the stupidest thing I've ever fished for in my life, because it's cold here in January and February. And you got to be quiet. And you can't build a fire and heat yourself beside that river. You got to be stealthy. And it's the worst fishing I've ever had in my life. Or striper. I used to know striper fishing. Not a lot of stripers here in the rivers anymore, but striper fishing, just fish all night long. I used to go catfishing in eastern Washington, and we would get there about dark and go home about daylight. And I'm thinking, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, because it's not convenient. And you have to plan where. There are places that it would be really nice to fish at, but sometimes you got to go where the fish are. And you got to use bait. And you got to use bait that's attractive to them and not attractive to you. I've been fishing with people that come from I can remember a certain person came from California, come up fishing with us, and we'd go out and we were catching black snapper. And so black snapper, that time, they've changed a little bit. Isn't it amazing how it changes? But we had a lead head with a pink and white worm on it. And that was absolutely, I catch more snapper on that than anything else. And this person came out and he had a whole bag full of bait, of lures. And they were the most pretty things I've ever seen. And he must have paid a fortune for them. And there were spinners and bells, and there was lights, and there was battery operated, and all kinds of things. And all that bait was bait for him. Somebody hooked him. He thought he was going to hook a hook. He was going to hook a fish with bait that somebody hooked him with. Did you know you can catch fish on a $500 reel, or you can catch fish on a cane pole? And you can be an expert at catching fish, or you can catch fish on the first day you go out. And there's some things that you have to do. Most important is you don't scare the fish away before you catch them. And guess what? It's not as much fun to catch a fish if somebody else catches the fish for you. There are people I wish was here right now I could talk to. Fishermen have patience, perseverance, courage, and they must have an eye for the right moment. He said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. I'm wondering, who fished for you? Because somebody fished for you. In the early 1950s, could have been early 49, 50, in a little town in Porterville, California, was a family in trouble. The father of that family was a hopeless alcoholic, a wife beater, and a gambler, addicted to gambling. The mother was, as sometimes wives of families like this, was completely gone. She was a woman in need. Her children were being neglected. Her oldest son had just been arrested for armed robbery. She had no food. Husband had gambled all the money away. He was a truck driver and was gone for long periods of time, come home and gambled it all away before they could even pay their rent. She was about to be evicted. There was a little Pentecostal church in town. And this little Pentecostal church took pity on her, came to her and gave her some food, and she started going to church, and she received Christ as her Savior. They took some time and they ministered to her, and her sister at that time began to go to this church. The husband cursed at the church, hated church, turned all the kids against the church. Her husband was in a car, a brand new car in the early 50s, so a big boat. They were traveling at a high rate of speed down the highway. This husband, the drunk alcoholic, was sitting in the back seat, no seat belts back in those days. He had leaned over the two guys, and they were laughing and telling jokes, and they were flying down the freeway and probably a little bit inebriated when they head on to another car. Now, when they head on to another car, when they hit like this, we didn't have that kind of safety glass we have today, no seat belts. But the two in the front seat weren't hurt too bad. But this man, alcoholic, gambler, went through the windshield. They tell me that he did a somersault, did a somersault, head over heels, and slid off the end of the car, feet first. When cars slam together and their wheels are locked, they tell me, and evidently it happened this way, is that they open up for a split second and come back together again. Well, when they came back together again, this man's right leg was between the bumpers and was completely shattered. His head was crushed. They took him to the hospital. They said he wasn't going to live. He was in a coma. I understand he was in a coma for 45 days. During that time, they were just trying to keep him alive. And he woke up. He had a beard by that time, and he was still a little bit groggy, and he came out of the coma, and he is awake. And inside there was a doctor and the insurance man were standing there talking about him. And the doctor said, "We're going to amputate his leg." And the insurance guy said, "No, we don't want to amputate the leg because that's going to cost more money. And we think maybe you can save that leg." And the doctor said, "We can't save the leg." And they were bickering back and forth when this man woke up and looked and said, "Do I have a vote in this? I vote we keep the leg." During that time, of course, now he's not working at all, and he's completely immobilized, and they really became destitute. The church began to bring groceries daily to the family, to feed the family. The young man who had just been arrested for armed robbery was so embarrassed at that he left home for a while. During that time, because of the kindness of that church, this man got saved. He came to Christ on his crutches. He was immobilized for about a year. And he became one of the greatest Christian men I ever met in my life. That would be my grandfather. Because this church took a lady who was in need under their wings. And so this man gets saved. Well, now they begin to go to the church. It makes my father now, 18-year-old boy, he's mad at the church and embarrassed at the church, and he hates the church and what they've done to his family, and he's been embarrassed by all the free food, and that's why he was robbing a store, by the way. And so he's walking down the road, and he sees the pastor in the building, and they were putting a new concrete floor in this wood floor building. They had taken all the flooring up, and they had sand down, and the pastor expected some of the men of the church to come and help him, and none of the men of the church came. And so he was there by himself, raking this sand out, trying to get it ready before the concrete truck got there, when my dad walks through the door and starts cursing him out. In fact, him and his friend, his other gang member guy, they are cursing him out. The guy's name was H.B. Thompson. He was about 25 years old. He had had enough. He had had enough of preaching. He had had enough of nobody helping him. He had had enough of everything. He was also picking cotton to pay his way to become a preacher. And he said, "If you think you're so tough, come in here. We'll have a fight." And he said, "This is what it'll be. If I win, you come to church. And if you win, then you get to tell everybody you beat me up." Well, my dad took him up on it. He walked in the room, and this guy, who he didn't know had been a boxer in the Navy, had just nailed him. He nailed both of them. The first guy, he hit him one time and knocked him down, and his buddy ran away. And before he could turn and run, the guy grabbed my dad and beat him up in Jesus' name. Began to set on him, holding his arms down while this guy's cursing at him. And he says, "Are you going to come to church?" And he says, "No, I'm not going to come to church." So he just took a handful of sand and poured it in his mouth. And he spit and said, "Are you going to come to church yet?" And he said, "No," and he did it again. He said the third time, my dad told me the third time, he said, I lied to him. I said, "Yeah, I'm coming to church." He said, "Guess what? I didn't go to church that Sunday." But about 2 Sundays later, I thought, I got to go find out what kind of a preacher was that. When me and my friend, I have a friend, his name's Thompson, and we get into all this. We meet together once a year at Bethel. And there's somebody who say, how do you guys know each other? You live in Florida and he lives in Oregon. And we say, well, we have this common denominator. His dad beat up my dad and caused him to become a Christian. We say he beat the devil out of my dad. That's a great evangelism tool, by the way. Well, because of that, my dad got saved. My dad got saved and was called into the ministry. And the other children, the other 3 children, there were 2 boys and 2 girls in that family. And my uncle is also a pastor, still preaches to this day. One of his children are a pastor, and one of his grandchildren are a pastor. No, 2 of his grandchildren are pastors today. And the whole family is saved. And on my side, it's me and my brother, and of course, we begin to think about, I'm watching my grandkids are here, and watching the grandkids in Arizona, they're worshiping God, loving God, and we think, man, it's getting bigger and bigger. And then my other 2 aunts, they both married from Bible college. They went to Bible college and married 2 pastoral candidates. They were going to be preachers, but they was Vietnam War, and they both got put into the Army and went into the Coast Guard and became career men, but they raised their kids for Christ and their grandkids for Christ. And I started counting up. I started counting all of us up that has been affected by this. And well, Debbie and I stopped at 100. At 100 people that come to Christ. 5 generations so far. 5 generations of Christians from one little lady who was in dire need of somebody to come and share Jesus with her. And because of that, over the next 5 generations, she's responsible for 100 people coming to Jesus Christ. Well, I don't know if I need to tell somebody about Christ or not. Well, I was listening to Wayne Cadera today, and he began to tell that story of how that the guy who actually started, I think, the YMCA was responsible for D.L. Moody getting saved, and D.L. Moody was responsible for Billy Graham getting saved. You think that one guy up there who just happened to, his teacher just happened to take pity over him and teach him the gospel, and now millions and millions. They said Billy Graham have had 3 million converts in his lifetime. You see, it all starts with one person. You think, who am I and what can we do in this small church? What can we do? And I'm here to tell you that it's just like Jesus planned. He went to 12 people and led them to him and said, now all I want to make you is a fisher of men. Oh, gosh, I haven't got to the sermon yet. Told my wife this is going to be a short one, and evidently it isn't. Let me just ask the sound booth back there. Is that a 35-minute timer or a 25-minute timer? Oh, my word. Okay. You've heard this before, and I'm going to read it. It's a 2-minute read, so I'm going to waste 2 minutes of the sermon. Now it came to pass that a group existed who called themselves fishermen. And lo, there were many fish in the waters all around. In fact, the whole area was surrounded with ocean, streams, and lakes, and filled with fish. And week after week, month after month, year after year, those who called themselves fishermen met in meetings and talked about their call to fish, the abundance of fishing, how they might go about fishing. And year after year, they carefully defined what fishing means, defending fishing as an occupation and declaring that fishing is always to be a primary task of fishermen. And continually they search for new and better methods of fishing and better and newer ways of defining fishing. And they created witty slogans and displayed them on big, beautiful banners. And these fishermen built big, beautiful buildings called fishing headquarters and pleaded that everyone should be a fisherman and every fisherman should fish. And one thing they didn't do, however, is they did not fish. Imagine how hurt they were when someday someone suggests that those who don't fish are really not fishermen. No matter how much they claim to be, yet it did sound correct. Is a person a fisherman if year after year he never fishes? Let me ask you, is one really following if he isn't fishing? See, we were called to follow him. We say, I like this new term. I hear it all the time now. We used to be called Christians, but a lot of people say now I'm a Christ follower. I like that, by the way. I'm a follower of Jesus. That's what I do. Are you a follower of Jesus if you're not fishing? If you know how to fish and you don't fish? So let's talk about this heart for evangelism. I'm not sure what all I put on this sermon, so let me just keep going. We don't do excellence so we can become a cruise ship, but we can become a fishing fleet. We're not here to be a cruise ship. We're not here to listen. No, never. Keep on track. We do excellence because of our heart for evangelism. It's a struggle for a church when we get to a place where we begin to look inward instead of outward. Where a church for Christians is good for Christians. I'm the worst on this, because what happens is I begin to listen to Christians and what Christians want, and as your pastor, I want to give you what you want, but I'm not sure I always give you what you need, because we have a church, a Christian church for Christians, but a church for the lost is good for the lost. This could get really challenging, so I'm going to try to keep it easy. Look what Jesus came for. He kind of gives us his mission statement in Luke chapter 10. He says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." He came to seek and to save the lost. And then he gives us three of these parables. They're found in... let me read you Luke 5 so we can get to that next part. Jesus answered and said, these are the distractors, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. It's the lost. So he gives us this parable. It's in Luke chapter 15, and it's a story about lost things. There's three lost things here. The first is the lost sheep, and he says the lost sheep, they're the priority. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep, one lost one. Wouldn't you leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost one until you found it? He said the priority is for the lost one. Did you realize that if Jesus came in here right now, he walked right in here and sat down. If there was one sinner in this building, that's who he would go to. He wouldn't go to me, he wouldn't go to you. He would go first of all to the sinner. In fact, one of the things that they said is that Jesus was always a friend of the sinner. The lost coin. Moving quickly, can you tell? Lost coins, these are the people that need persistence. Or imagine a woman who has 10 coins and loses one, and she lights a lamp and scours the house looking in every nook and cranny until she finds it. I like what I should have said this about the lost sheep. Can you go back to the next slide for me? Lost sheep represents people who are lost and they know it, but they don't know what to do about it. Did you know if you go out and ask somebody if they're a follower of Christ, they'll say no, but I need to be. They know they're lost. In fact, if you ask people, are you a Christian or are you a sinner? Most people will say, I'm a sinner. And the reason is because they don't have a reason to become a Christian or a Christ follower, or they just don't do it, but they don't. I mean, if you were to ask what is sin, and you were asking a church what is sin, we would have a set of rules. But I can tell you what, you ask a sinner about sin, and they know what sin is. They know they're lost, they don't do it. Now, the lost coin is persistence. And this coin represents people who are lost, and they don't know it. And there's also a great group of people who are lost, they don't know it. And so we treat one way and we treat one the other way. The way that you take care of people lost and don't know it is really what they need is they need a follower of Christ who will befriend them. Got it? Then we have the lost son. We know the prodigal son. We know all about him. I just read the last verse. It says, this is my son. He was dead. He's alive again. He was lost and now he's found. The lost son represents people who are lost and know it, and they even know what they need to do about it. And they need prayer. That's what they need. You need to pray for them. I mean, you say, well, I need to convince them. Well, they're already convinced. By the way, a lot of sinners are convinced they're going to hell. And they really don't know how to get out of that thought. Some just need patience. Some just need prayer. Well, the church wasn't designed to, as a whole, the church wasn't designed to share good news. Not as a whole. People are. He didn't call the church to do this. He didn't say, and Wayne Cadera this morning, I haven't got time to talk too much about him, but Wayne Cadera began to talk about there's 3 ways that people get saved. One-on-one, that's what we'll talk about in just a minute, or many-on-one, where somebody would come to church, or even more important, one in many, where you go to church, or where a group actually begins to minister as to my grandmother and begins to minister to her. But people were called to share the good news. I mean, in reality, that's what it's all about. And so I want to invite you today to invest and invite. That's the 2 words I want to say. To invest and to invite. Say that with me. Let's say it with me. Simply invest, say it. Simply invest and boldly invite. Say it again. Simply invest, boldly invite. So we've given you some cards today. This is the altar call. So from now on, time is not at the essence for me. And these cards, there are 2 parts, and if you run out of them, I have some more. And I hope I run out of them. I hope you run out of them. In fact, I made this, and that was the last of the card stock I had, and I thought that's good enough. And then I thought, no, I believe that God's got more people than this. And so we're gonna talk today about investing. And so the way you invest is you begin to strategically, it's going to be easy for you. I'm going to let you off really easy. There's other ways to do this, but this is what we're going to do right now, is to strategically pray for those that you would like to see saved. And especially one. So everyone has this right here, and it says, please pray for, and a place to write somebody's name that needs to be a Christ follower. Now, if you want to, on the back of that card, you can write your name. I don't care. That's up to you. The other side says, I will risk it all to win one more. That's where I want you to write their name, and I want you to pull this off, and I want this part, that half goes on your refrigerator, or on your steering wheel, or your office desk. Wherever you're going to see it the most. This part right here, this part, goes in this bucket right here. And so if you'll put that in there, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to partner with you, and every day I'm going to pray for that person. How many know prayer changes things? How many know this? Prayer changes people.
We hope you've enjoyed this message from Grace Church. Make sure to stay connected throughout the week online at gchurch.us and on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week.